just before I hand you over, I wanted to invite you to a whole series of events on hyperhabitats. So we're looking at situations where the technology is progressing a little bit too fast for the low. It's probably progressing a little bit too fast for all of us, but all of us are involved in building it. So somewhere in between, there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance going on. So we started in Manchester last month. Today is the second event. We're going to run 6 events looking at impact of technology on us, on society, and the way we build stuff. So over to Wendy.
Sorry, a slight slide panic. I wanted to start with a little bit of history just because this has been a contentious area for a really long time, and as a result, I'm going to whiz through these slides to find the one I want. It's a little bit distorted. That wasn't, it looked like Time magazine originally, but that is the state of pornography online in 1995. When a journalist called Philip Elmer DeWitt wrote a lengthy piece about a study from supposedly a Carnegie Mellon student named Marty Rim, who purported to have discovered that something like 80% of the traffic on Usenet was pornography. Now, it turned out that not only the study was flawed, he wasn't a student at Carnegie Mellon, the whole thing was a fraud, but for the next 15 years, that study went on being cited in Congress, and if you look at the date, this was July 1995. In 1996, the Communications Decency Act was passed, and then, of course, it got struck down because it violated the First Amendment. But the point is that the mid-90s was the period when a lot of things started because people were really upset about the notion that children were accessing pornography online, which is where we are still. And I just wanted to bring it up because right around then, 96, there was a big meeting that happened because the Metropolitan Police were telling ISPs that they had to remove something like 133 news groups from the Usenet feed. Yeah, probably most of you don't remember Usenet, but at the time it was the social medium du jour. And what the police were saying is either you remove this material and make it inaccessible, or we will pass laws and regulate you to death and so forth. And pedophiles in particular are invoked every time somebody wants to bring in a policy like we must be able to read every encrypted communication, because pedophiles, drug dealers, organized crime, and terrorists will get away with terrible crimes. We are hearing again, for the first time in 20 years, we're hearing these noises that we cannot, what is it that Cameron said? We cannot have a single communication that we can't read. We must be able to read everything. When we fought this in the mid-90s, the thing that I think won it for us eventually was that they wanted electronic commerce. And you couldn't really do electronic commerce without being able to encrypt the details of financial transactions. All of this is kind of a preamble to saying that I think this is why it's really important to get the research right. That particular study, the cyber porn, haunted us for a long time, and it was complete bullshit, if you don't mind the language. And so one of the things that I really appreciate about the work of our first 2 speakers, who are Jamie Bartlett and Gareth Owen, is that they're making genuine attempts to actually, come up with a solid understanding of what is actually going on online. Unfortunately, one of the speakers who was announced, Elena Martellozzo, isn't going to be with us. I'm shouting. I think they can hear me without it. Isn't going to be with us tonight. Hopefully, Jamie is going to tell us a little bit about her work. I'm disappointed because I was very curious. So on that note, I will hand over to Jamie to do. Jamie is the author of a book called The Darknet. He is the director of the Center for Analysis of Social Media at the Demos think tank. And the thing I liked about his book when I read it was that it put a human face on a number of things that are sort of just concepts in the Daily Mail, cam girls or people with thousands of child abuse images on their computers. And I liked the fact that he sort of went and actually took the trouble to talk to people and meet people and understand what they were actually like. And I also like the fact that he explored gray areas. It was that his book is not just black and white. This is all bad. This is all, you know, this is how we can make it good. So on that note, I will hand over to Jamie.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Wendy. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. Can you hear me at the back okay? Yeah. And I'm not deafening you at the front. Good. Got the right tone here. Did someone say shut up? Oh, all right. I'll try. So I've just published a book called The Darknet, which was going to be on sale here, but apparently everyone here has probably already bought it. So forgive me if you know some of this already. And I'm going to start on that subject of grey areas and start with a very brief story from the book when I went onto the Silk Road, the drugs website, and purchased some drugs for the research. It's a really important point, that final line. Because actually, throughout the book, the book that I wrote was not just about the darknet, by which many people now mean Tor hidden services or hidden encrypted networks. It was actually trying to immerse myself, this is why I look so terrible, immerse myself as fully as possible in a number of sort of supposedly shocking internet subcultures. The internet trolls, the neo-Nazis, the cam girls, the child pornographers, the pro-suicide sites, and meet the people who are part of those subcultures in person to try to understand what it was that they got from this separate identity they had online. But for the drugs chapter in my book, I thought, well, I'll just go and buy some drugs and see how that works. It's far easier. So what I did was exactly that. The Silk Road, which I'm sure many of you know. Does anyone buy their drugs from the Silk Road? A couple of hands up in the back. Yeah, well, not since it, I'm sorry about that, yeah, not since it closed down. But essentially, as I'm sure many of you are aware, without having used it yourself, there is a number of darknet marketplaces which sit as a Tor hidden service, an encrypted site, where more or less anything and everything is available to be bought and sold, with a few exceptions. This is the grey area, though. And let me explain why. When I went onto the Silk Road for the first time, this was actually the Silk Road 2.0 after the original had been shut down by the FBI in October of last year. The amazing thing about it, when you sign up for the first time, is simply how much choice is available to you. The incredible array of products, more drugs than you've ever seen. I mean, it's not just drugs that they used to sell on this anonymous marketplace. It was more or less anything, with the exception of fake identity, munitions, and illegal pornography. But actually, in April of last year, the top-selling item on the Silk Road 2.0 was, in fact, fake Tesco vouchers, £20 Tesco vouchers. Wasn't drugs at all. Now, people think that the trick of the Silk Road, the reason it worked, fundamentally, is because of the encryption, because you need to have the Tor browser to access this site, and that scrambles the traffic, which means your IP address can't be given away. You use Bitcoin to pay, which is, of course, an encrypted cryptocurrency. And as a result, you are able to use this system to be able to procure your drugs. That's not the secret of the Silk Road. That stuff makes it all work. But the reason it's so popular is a far simpler concept, and that is customer choice and customer service. When you log on to the Silk Road, or when I did, there was something like 13,000 different products available from around 900 or so vendors dotted all over the world. The reason the Silk Road is so successful is because you are faced, as a consumer, with a remarkable degree of choice, and you also have an extremely important feedback mechanism, which is, as you're all familiar with, customer reviews. The reason Amazon works is because we all get to rate stuff, like my book. I don't know what the average Amazon score is on my book, about 4.3 or something out of 5. I'm not sure exactly. I don't check it every 5 minutes. But this is the way the Silk Road works too. Everyone who buys products from the Silk Road leaves a score out of 5 and leaves a very detailed piece of customer review. How good was the product? Did it arrive on time? How good was the packaging? How strong was the dosage? And as a result, of course, what happens is the vendors of these products begin to operate in the interests of the customer, because they know at any time I can simply take my custom to another vendor who's got a better score out of 5. So when I was on the site, I'm looking around, as you do. It's remarkably familiar when you're there, at the user reviews and the scores. And I found one, Drugs Heaven, excellent scores, promised to give free packaging and delivery. If I'm not happy, he'll give me my Bitcoin back, and so on. And I email this person, it's overseas, on the internal emailing system, and say, Dear Drugs Heaven, I'm new to this site. I would like to start very small with some marijuana. Could you please advise? A couple of hours later, get a reply. Dear sir, thank you for your inquiry. May I suggest that you start with our Afghan Kush, has excellent reviews. 1 gram would be fine. Let me know if you have any further questions. I hope we can do some business together. Best wishes, Drugs Heaven. This is the secret, customer service. And I managed to pull down from the Silk Road 120,000 pieces of feedback from that consumers had left on the site. And this was the most remarkable statistic of all. The average score, the average review score across the site was about 4.8, 4.9 out of 5. It's better than my book, by the way. Customer choice. And you know, this is the thing about the Silk Road, and this is the sort of theme that I want to push here, is that it keeps getting smarter. These sites will keep learning, keep adapting, because they're driven by competition and choice. Recently, it's only about 3 months ago, I learned of another vendor on the Silk Road. Was again a different site now, but I'm just using the Silk Road as shorthand for the 20 or so that are currently in operation, who purports to offer, and get this, fair trade cocaine that's organically sourced. And they say that we don't source our cocaine from dodgy cartels in Colombia. All of our stuff is locally grown by local farmers, and we are going to put 20% of all our profits back into local education programs. This is the market, this is for the North London market, I think, especially Islington people. So this is the secret of the Silk Road, and this is why it's a grey area, and this is why the whole discussion about internet anonymity and where it might lead is extraordinarily difficult. Because on the one hand, what this anonymity has allowed to exist is a functioning marketplace which operates in the interest of consumers, where you are able to source your drugs. If you are going to take drugs, you're able to source them in a predictable way. You can predict the dosage of those drugs, which is incredibly important when you're talking about Class A drugs, because so many of the unnecessary overdoses that people suffer is because they don't know what their drug has been cut with. It also strips out a lot of the street crime associated with turf wars over street corners, which costs millions and billions of dollars around the world. That's all sort of good. On the other hand, of course, and here is the great problem, it makes more drugs more available, more easily, for more people. And not only that, did I say, yeah, that is a problem. And the reason that's a problem, so a lot of people are like, what's the problem with that? One of the reasons that's a problem is it's not only drugs that are for sale there. Guns are for sale there. Hired hackers are for sale there. Illegal pornography is for sale there. And it's also very, very dangerous Class A drugs that are for sale there. And what happens when the market continues to evolve and people start buying wholesale from these markets, selling retail in their universities or whatever, you're creating a generation of people that have become drug dealers almost without realizing it. So there are problems with this. Of course there are problems with this. But this is where I think it's all going. The Darknet as it is at the moment, or the Tor hidden services, remains a relatively small fraction. You'll hear more about it from Gareth, of course, a small fraction of the net. But I think that's all going to change. As a result of the Edward Snowden revelations, the Snowden effect, if you want to call it that, has been the following. Yes, of course, more concern about internet privacy, but more and more people taking measures to protect their internet privacy. More and more people, perhaps this is the really important long-term effect, more and more people are building and open sourcing software to allow people to remain anonymous, hidden, private, secret, online. And I think more and more people are going to start, they already are, but more and more people are going to start using that. And in 10 years, actually using the Darknet, using the Tor hidden services, I think most of us are going to be using this stuff. I really think things are going to change a lot. The internet, as Wendy will tell you, has changed dramatically over the last 30 or 40 years, moving from different parts, and I think it's about to change again. I think in the future, it may seem rather strange to say it now, but I think in the future it's going to be far easier for people to remain hidden online, and it's going to be far harder to censor stuff that we put online, whether that's drugs for sale, whether that's illegal pornography, whether that's ISIS propaganda. Now, that is going to have some remarkable benefits for all of us, and especially for people in other parts of the world where autocratic regimes exist. But I don't think we can pretend there aren't going to be problems with that. Because along with the civil rights activists, the human rights activists, the journalists, it is also always serious and organized criminals and terrorists who are early adopters of technology. And what we do about that, how we as a society determine how our intelligence agencies work, how our police work, how all of us decide to live in a world in which information is going to be far harder to censor, is really one that I think is, of course, one of the burning political questions of the day. I think I should stop there, because I know this meant to be very... She's grabbing the thing off me already. Yeah. Yeah. Right, yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
That was Jamie. We should have had that slide up while he was speaking. Gareth Owen is a senior lecturer at the School of Computing at the University of Portsmouth, and you probably saw the headlines that covered his work. He did a different study of the Darknet. And there are some limitations to this study that he will discuss for you. The headlines sort of made it sound like, you know, sort of there is this horrible thing just lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce. But I'll let you explain what you really found. Gareth Owen.
So, as a show of hands, how many of you saw the headline, 80% of something related to Tor is child abuse? Oh, okay, so only a small fraction of you. Okay, so my background is I'm a computer scientist, and I've generally believed in internet freedoms, much like lots of techies. And of course, when I saw the Snowden releases, I thought the answer to this is cryptography, strong cryptography, secure email, and those sorts of things. And then sort of the beginning of this year just gone, myself and a colleague thought it would be rather interesting to do a study on the Darknet, try and understand what the types of sites are, crucially how many of these sites actually there are, because before no one knew. How long do these sites actually exist for, and what types of category, you know, of content are they serving up, and how many visitors there are to each of the individual sites. Now, when I started the study, I said to my colleague, wouldn't it be really nice if we found out that Tor hidden services were used for all of the things the Tor project claimed they were used for? And he looked at me as if I was a complete idiot, and it pains me greatly to admit that he may be somewhat right. But this is now a year on, and I think the results from our study have somewhat changed my views a little bit, but I'm probably largely in agreement with Jamie on many of the things he said. So how did our study work? Well, there's two ways you can try and analyze the Darknet. You can get a list of all of the websites, and you can visit them. So you go on something like the Hidden Wiki, which is sort of an index of some of the sites, a small fraction of the sites, and you can visit them and try and classify them. That was our first thought, well, we could do it like this. But then as we studied how the Tor hidden services actually work themselves, we found actually we could collect a full list of all of the hidden services, so even those hidden services which aren't linked to anywhere, and as well as collecting the list of these hidden services, we could also measure how many people or how many things are making requests for each of these sites. So we could sort of work out the relative popularity of each of the sites on the Tor network as well. So what did we find? Well, we collected around 80,000 Tor hidden services over a period of 6 months. About 45,000 of those exist at any one point in time. The vast majority are not offering a website. So there may be instant messaging, IRC chat. It's believed about 60 or 70% are actually infected computers with botnet software installed on them. So they're not offering a website, they're actually zombie computers waiting to be accessed remotely. So it's very difficult to categorize those sorts of things, so we focused just on the hidden services which are offering a website, and we built a custom crawler which would visit each of these websites and pull down lots of information from each of the different sites. So we wanted to answer a lot of questions. We wanted to know, how big is the Tor economy? Is it very insular? Is it very open? Does it connect very well with the open web? Collect things like email addresses as well as categorize stuff. So we're collecting a whole range of data points from each of these individual sites. And then we classified them into categories based on what their predominant purpose was. And this is the number of sites that we classified in the fraction of sites which we classified in each of the different categories. And you can see drugs type marketplaces made up the biggest category of all of them, followed by marketplaces offering stuff which wasn't necessarily predominantly drugs or drugs and some other category of sites. And then there was a variety of other things, wikis and forums, Bitcoin services. So these were both money laundering Bitcoin services as well as legitimate Bitcoin exchanges. We didn't distinguish between the two. Whistleblower sites, which is probably the thing which Tor gets the most attention for. We did see quite a few of these sites, and they were largely the global leaks and secure leaks, the secure drop platform used by by a fraction of the journalistic community at the moment to receive documents securely. And then a whole range of other stuff, forums and hacking and stuff, porn, as perhaps you'd expect. And then everything we classified in this abuse category on the left-hand side were child abuse sites. So these were sites either offering images, doing chat for the community, forums, those sorts of things. Now, every single site that we classified in this category was unambiguously child abuse sites. Keep in mind, we're not child abuse researchers, we're techies, very much so. Everything we put in that site was unambiguous to a layperson as being a child abuse site. We have since learned that, in fact, so we tried to classify this conservatively. So if an abuse site, looking at the data we had from the crawler, we knew it was offering some sort of indecent images, but we couldn't say, well, it's definitely abuse sites or definitely pornography. We classified conservatively, and we put it in the pornography category. And in fact, we've since learned that there were a couple of sites which we classified as porn that actually were, in fact, child abuse sites. And that's because we're not fetching images from any of these sites, so we can't say for absolute certain. So we've just tried to do it very conservatively because it's very contentious and say, okay, well, all of the sites in this category are unambiguously child abuse sites. So this is based on the number of sites in each of the different categories. And then if we sort of re-rank this by the number of requests going to each of the sites, so this is the number of people requesting each of, the number of people requesting drug sites, the number of people requesting hacking sites, and so on and so forth, this is the picture we get. This is not what we expected to find at all. So we saw about 83% of all of the requests for these sites went to the child abuse sites. And in fact, looking at the sort of the top 10, top 20 sites, practically every other site was a child abuse site. So there were a very large number of requests. But of course, the really important thing to discuss here is what is it we're measuring? What is this request thing that we're talking about? Because that's really what informs what it is which we're trying to measure here. So when you first visit a site, you make a request for the site. We count that once. If, without closing down the Tor software, you visit the site again within the same 24-hour period, we still count just one. If, however, during the day you close down the Tor software and you revisit the site, we count that as twice. Okay, so we count it as, so it's somewhere between visits and somewhere between visitors. It's neither exactly one or the other, it's somewhere in between those two things. So what are the other possible explanations for this? So we've had some interesting discussions with the Tor project quite early on before we presented our results, because we wanted to get their input on the results as well. And there have essentially been a couple of things proposed which could could push this number up. The first is that child protection agencies around the world crawl child abuse sites, as one would expect. How many child abuse agencies are in the world? I suggest there's probably less than 20,000. One of the sites in the abuse category, we're seeing 100,000 requests per day. Right? So this number could be out by a little bit, but we're looking at perhaps 10, 15% if every single child abuse agency in the world is crawling these sites every single day during our entire study. The second thing that could push this number up is distributed denial of service attacks. It suggested that you could try and attack the measure that we're using, but actually, if you were to sort of do the attack in a way which would inflate these figures, that would be a very naive attack. It probably wouldn't take the sites offline. If it did, it would only take the sites offline for say, 10 minutes or so. And in fact, there are far more reliable attacks which are far less technically complex. So yes, it's possible. We're only counting requests for the sites. We can't distinguish what is making the request. So it could be a crawler, it could be a person, it could be a distributed denial of service attack. I think the distributed denial of service attack is unlikely. If it's crawlers, it's probably only making up 10, 15% at most if we assume the worst case. What other limitations are there? So those are probably the main two which push this number up. Since we did this study, we've chatted to the Internet Watch Foundation, and they say, if you don't know, are responsible for policing this type of content online. If you find this content, you report it to the Internet Watch Foundation. And interestingly, I didn't know, but their record is that on average, the time between a site being reported to them and it being taken down is less than 1 hour, which frankly is commendable. Absolutely astonishing that they can do that. So what they suggested was that many of these sites advise the people visiting them to close their browser down frequently and clear their history and what have you. And if they do that, then we count them twice, 3 times. Every time they restart their browser, we count them again and again. So if they do that lots of times in one day. The other thing that could potentially be a limitation is if, for example, people that visit sites in the abuse category tend to visit lots of the sites in the abuse category when they go to it, and the same isn't true of any other category, then that would, of course, push the number up as one would expect. However, when we look at the data, we're just simply not seeing that. Most of the categories have a core of sites which are the most popular, and that's true of the abuse category. There's a small number of sites which are extremely popular, and then a large number of sites which just don't get very many hits at all, maybe 3 or 4 requests a day.
Sorry to interrupt. What happens if a website links to images from a bunch of other sites? So what if someone is visiting a page that is pulling in images from all of the other sites all over the place?
Then we would count a request for every single site for each of those images. Okay. But the site would load extremely slowly. Because if you try to visit a hidden service, the actual setup procedure for it takes about 10 seconds or so. So yes, if the site was linking to 100 other sites, then yes, we would count 101 requests, 1 for the first site, and then again for the rest of them. Yep. But I think it's important to say, we're measuring requests for websites. Tor is an anonymity service. We can't distinguish what the purpose of that request is, right? So, and we're not trying to claim that this number means visitors, right? I'm saying it's probably somewhere between visits and visits, but there are some things which, of course, could inflate the number. But this, at the moment, is the best way in which you can measure data on the Tor network. There is no other way to measure data. Correct?
Then you mentioned restarting the browser would cause another request.
Sorry for the confusion, yes. So I'm assuming you're using the Tor browser bundle, which the Tor software and the browser are bundled into one component. Yep. But if you use the Tor, if you're a techie person and you use them as separate components, then it's just the restart of the Tor process and not of the browser. If you're using it in the case which I suspect many people don't, yeah. Correct, yeah. If you've got multiple processes going through one Tor instance, we'll count 1 request in a 24-hour period. Correct, unless you're using the browser bundle, in which they're one of the same thing. So all we're doing is measuring requests for the website. We can't actually determine why they're visiting the website. We can't even tell which pages they're visiting on the website. When you first connect to the website, you make a request, or rather the Tor process makes a request. That's precisely what we're counting. We know nothing more. The communication between the user and the hidden service is encrypted. We can't extract any information from it whatsoever.
It's a bad user experience then.
Sorry? Well, yeah, so I mean, this at the moment is the only way you can measure this type of data. You can't inspect the traffic. Let me come back. Can someone remind me then just to talk about anonymity attacks, if I'm permitted time?
Do you have any way of saying if the traffic is coming from, let's just say in general, the same network or the same geographical area, or looking for some type of pattern from that?
No. We count requests, right? The requests, when they're made to us, are anonymous. We can't even tell if the requests are made by the same user. We can't tell where they're coming from. It's technically possible, but it would be very expensive. And we're talking perhaps tens of thousands of pounds to try and do that, and you'd be doing a very large-scale de-anonymization attack on the Tor thing. So if there are no more questions, maybe I could just...
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question, sure.
You said you didn't download images, which I understand because that's actually illegal. Sure. So how did you ascertain that the content hosted on the site was actually child abuse? And the reason I ask is that there is still a conferencing system based in London called Kix, and in the very early days of Kix, sometime in the early 90s, somebody from the Daily Mail came online and managed to get access to the adult conference and simply read the text descriptors of the files contained in that conference. And one of them said something like Japanese schoolgirls with 12 questions. I know this because somebody told me, by the way. Japanese schoolgirls with question marks, you know, and the image that was in that file was described to me as being like 45-year-old Japanese women dressed up in schoolgirl uniforms, but it had been given this caption. So how did you actually ascertain? That's why I asked.
So all of the sites classified in the abuse category made a reference to paedophile in some way. And to take that precise example, the site which we misclassified as porn, which we later found out to be an abuse site, was advertised as Ukrainian girls, was the title for the website and the content on the site. So we said, okay, well, that's could be either, and we'll classify it as porn conservatively.
But I mean, did for example, when you showed the list to the Internet Watch Foundation, did they say, oh, yes, we know about these?
So we haven't shown the list to the Internet Watch Foundation because the Tor project were concerned about us collecting these hidden services, and we're a university, we've got to comply rigorously with ethics, so we have reinforced to destroy the data set.
It's just that people can describe things misleadingly, let's say.
So, I don't really want to go into giving the actual titles for the website.
I understand. It's just,
you know, I mean, the journalists also were pushing me on this, and I said, you know, we don't want to because it makes them very easily searchable. You know, we're confident that everything we put into the abuse category was a site targeted at the paedophile community. Whether it would be chat or image sharing, we can't. We've grouped them both together.
Right. Okay. To me, that still raises a lot of questions about how much and what kind of weight we should give the study in terms of deciding policy going forward. Yeah. I mean, but you never claimed that it was definitive. So
we're not saying that this is hundreds of thousands of people visiting the site. Yes, we're seeing 100,000 requests for the most popular site. Could that be 100,000 unique people visiting it every day? Yes, it could be. It could also be the same person closing their browser down 100,000 times a day and visiting the sites. To take two extremes, you know.
It was probably. I'm going to come to you in a minute. It was probably Jamie doing research.
Excuse me. That is. Did anyone get that? Is libelous, right? Yeah, just a quick thing. So the problem that I had with all of this was deciding how one goes about making a moral judgment as well. I mean, what value would you place on, for example, the whistleblower site? You know, it could be 10 people using a whistleblower site versus 100 people using an illegal pornography site. How do you then? Is that a sort of utilitarian way of sort of weighting the different values of how that technology is used? Of course not. It's absurd. You can't do it. But in my experience, and I did quite a lot of research on the child pornography sites on Tor as well, and the Tor hidden services as well. Now, the overwhelming majority of images that people have on their computers are not taken directly from Tor. They're taken from all across the web, and most of what the Internet Watch Foundation is referred to are ClearNet sites. But the problem is this: Tor hidden services, in respect of illegal pornography, serve as an almost impossibly effective recycling machine. So every single time one of these sites gets knocked off, either by the FBI or by Anonymous or a group of hackers or whatever it is, within a matter of a few hours, it's back up again. Because what happens is that the supply of these images has been distributed to such an extent that lots of different people now have them encrypted on their own hard drives, which they've taken from a Tor hidden service, which they then re-upload as a Tor hidden service again as soon as they're removed. Now, back in 1997, the NSPCC estimated that there were approximately 7,000 illegal images of children in circulation in the UK. CEOP in 2012 found one individual with 2 million images on his computer. It's a completely different order of problem now that we're facing with this. And I think even though every single government rightly says we are going to rid the internet of illegal images of children, I'm not convinced it's possible. Not with the way that these systems now operate. Very brave last month, the head of the NCA, the National Crime Agency, said we cannot investigate every single person that goes onto Tor to look at images. It's too expensive. We're not going to be able to de-anonymize all of them. We're going to have to focus our resources on the most serious offenders, those that are producing images, those that are uploading images, not just those that are viewing those images. Incredibly controversial, of course, but I'm afraid to say I think he's probably right.
What's really interesting about that to me is that that's exactly the same thing that we've seen in file sharing with copyright, unauthorized sharing of copyrighted material of various kinds. They don't really go after people who download episodes of TV shows anymore. They go after the people who upload episodes of TV shows, and that makes sense. I mean, because, as you say, limited resources. You had a question, and
using that system, anti-paedophile sites would also be in there.
Yeah, but we didn't. I can't remember seeing those. Certainly, most of the sites we classified them were clearly aimed at the paedophile community.
Well, but a honey trap would be too. So that's the thing.
I know that a huge number of them are chat rooms where illegal images aren't shared, but it's talked about and discussed. So there's a lot of chat rooms which I suppose would have been classified as an abuse site without there necessarily being illegal images on them. But those chat rooms are important to direct people to the new links, the new sites that are uploaded as a Tor hidden.
I mean, I think it's probably important to say, we didn't set out to find this out. We didn't start our study, we wouldn't have done the study if we'd known we were going to find this out. And in fact, actually, when we had the graph, we sat on the results for 2 months wondering whether we should even publish them because it would be so controversial.
My question would be, given that even if you banned crypto in every country, stop it. I was a full-time solo musician. I know how to use a microphone. There were different microphones, I know. Given that you can't eradicate it, where do you make the trade-off? How do you say, are politicians going to have to sort of set a percentage of whistleblower-ness that makes it worth putting up with, X number of pedophiles? I mean, how are we going to, because we can't seriously get rid of all anonymity and all secrecy and all privacy. Equally, I mean, I hope we can't. And equally, very few people want to see children abused. So where do we place the balance? How do we figure out the balance?
So I actually gave a talk at this when I presented these results. the conference where I presented the results was a sort of techie, pro-internet freedoms type conference. So I'll prefix what I'm about to say with, I'm not necessarily saying one thing or the other, I'm just trying to describe what's technically possible, and it's up to you to make your mind up on what can be done. It is technically possible to block just the abuse sites from this. It's also technically possible to do it in a distributed fashion, so you don't have just a single person controlling the block list. It could be distributed amongst 1,000 people, for example, and it would need the consensus of a large fraction of those to block those sites. So at the moment, actually, although Tor hidden services are sort of advertised as something which is designed to block censorship, it's actually trivially easy at the moment to block a Tor hidden service. If one of you was running a Tor hidden service, I could have it offline within a day or so, and you wouldn't be able to bring it back online. So it's actually very easy for even an individual to block Tor hidden services at the moment. So it is possible to implement a block list, and there's probably 3 ways in which this can be done. The Tor project could take the lead, and they could embed a block list as the way, in sort of the way the Tor project works at the moment, and they could do it in a way which is completely open, that anyone could inspect the block list, that it would require the support of the core developers, so that it couldn't have one developer fiddle the system. The second way in which the block list could be implemented is you could require a large fraction of the relay operators which run the Tor sort of relays. You require a large fraction of those to vote on the block list and then apply the block list that way. That is technically possible now without the consent of the Tor project. I'm not advocating it either way. I'm just saying, look, it's possible. It's possible to do it in an open way. It's possible to do it in a way which requires consensus. I'm not supporting anything. That's just, don't shoot me.
If I could quickly add something. Rather shockingly, something like 30% of the illegal images that were referred to the Internet Watch Foundation last year were produced by young people themselves and then shared online. Now, that's incredibly difficult to stop if people keep doing it and everyone's armed with a smartphone. Now, more generally, I think political appetite for broad sweeping surveillance is, firstly, it's going to is becoming and will increasingly become less popular. Second, more and more people will work out ways to circumnavigate it easily and do so, as we've already seen, including the bad guys, including the terrorists who do use this stuff. And as a result, I think it's going to require a change in the way that we do our intelligence work, far more focus on detailed human intelligence surveillance, on targeted individuals, hacking into computers, bugs in people's rooms, as opposed to the large sweeping surveillance. Because I actually don't want there, I agree with David Cameron, I don't want there to be a place where people can knowingly operate beyond the arm of illegally constituted intelligence agencies. I just don't want them to misuse or abuse that power. So I think we also need to quite radically change the way that our intelligence agencies are overseen.
At this point, I'm going to hold the questions for the moment. We have actually 3 more speakers, and I'm going to ask them to come and join us. I hope we have 3. I'm like an idiot. I put the card down. We have Bjarni Einarsson, who is part of the Mailpile project to create secure email. We have John Baines. Do we? Where do we have John Baines? Yes, please stay. Who is a member of the Open Rights Group and the Society for Computers and Law, and blogs at informationrightsandwrongs.com on data protection related and freedom of information related issues. And we have one more, Rich Metzen, who is doing the off-the-grid game, or off-grid the game, a stealth game about surveillance. And so each, can you do 2 minutes each? Yeah. Now, you see, the balloons, the balloons are to, pop if you go too long.
All right.
Okay, we're okay for time.
So if it's, I'm not sure I should use the slides if I've only got 2 minutes.
Well, all right, make it 3 minutes.
All right, I'll try and speak really fast, and I apologize if you can't hear me. My voice decided to go away because I'm on stage, right? So I work on Mailpile. Mailpile is an email client, and for the purposes of this gathering, we can simplify and say this is an email client which has a very strong focus on bringing PGP encryption and other modern crypto technology to the masses in the email space. And we're doing it in an open source, free software way. So that's point 3 on our list of five things that guide the project. So how do we do that? What sort of technical guiding principles do we have? Where should we be using encryption in modern software? I believe that we should be encrypting the user's data at rest when it's stored, so that if someone steals his laptop, his data is not laid bare. I'm not the only person who thinks so. Google thinks so and are encrypting our phones, and Apple are as well. When you're reading and writing and sending email, we should be using encryption either as a way of signing the message so that you know who it comes from, or as a way of encrypting it so that people can't snoop on it if they weren't the intended recipient. And apparently that is now a politically contentious position to take. More technically, if you're writing software that interacts with the web, you should use HTTPS when possible. And we should be anonymizing things that the software does on your behalf. And this sort of relates to some of the things that Mailpile tries to do. We try and download images of the people that you're talking to from things like Gravatar and maybe in the future from Facebook. And if we start downloading images from the network, then anyone who listens to the network can ascertain who you're talking to, even if they can't read the email itself. So we would like to use software like Tor to do that sort of thing. And there's also interesting applications of cryptography when you're trying to fight spam. So that's where crypto relates to building an email client in 2015. Quick summary of the project. I've been working at this one way or another since 2011. We've really been working seriously for about a year and a half. So we started with an Indiegogo campaign in 2013 and managed to fund 2 full-time developers. And since then, we've been worrying about deadlines and slipping. My coworker on this, my colleague Smauri, he was apparently on stage here, I think in May.
Yeah.
And people asked for an update on what happened since then. I apologize if you guys weren't here, so I'm keeping it brief. We've released a second beta, which happened just a couple of weeks ago. If you download it and you have no experience with the project, what you'll find is it's an email client. You can read and write and send email. It has a search engine, so you can search your email the way people have come to take for granted on Gmail. But in this case, the search engine's on your machine. It's not somewhere in the cloud. We're using web-based technology to do the user interface, so it looks familiar, even if it is on your machine. And we're trying to achieve user-friendly PGP encryption, and we've made a significant amount of progress. Things that are not in the software today, we don't have any integration with anonymity tools. We're not hiding the metadata of your email when you send it. And we don't have a convincing story for managing your PGP keys, which is a long-term recipe for disaster. It's a hard problem. We have plans, but it's just not ready. And a lot of things are half-baked. I mean, this is not polished software yet. It's a work in progress. Again, for this crowd, highlights on the security work that we have done since Smauri stood on stage. We sat down and published our plans for what we want to do about security as a roadmap. It's a relatively detailed document, so if you have questions that I can't answer today and can't answer over pints, then you can find it on the internet. We wrote a post sort of complaining about how hard it is to program software that works with GNU PG, which is the sort of, these days it's the reference implementation of PGP. We've started a discussion with other teams on how to interoperate, how to exchange messages so that they can be read. And sort of the elephant in the room on that is that Google have announced a project called End-to-End, where they're trying to bring encryption to Gmail. And we want to be able to exchange messages with their users. And the strategy that they've taken makes that very, very hard. But we're having that discussion. So that's one of the things that we are working on. And we've had usability studies done, which is almost unheard of for open source software.
Yeah, not just open source software, also crypto software.
Yeah, well, and that's we've had one or I think two usability studies done by people that weren't us. We've done a bunch of sitting down with users ourselves, and we're trying to feed this into our workflow, and we intend to continue doing so.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Does Gareth's work give you any pause? Do you let's say we're 3 or 5 years from now and Mailpile is in widespread use, and you start getting up every morning and seeing headlines saying that Mailpile is the demon incarnate because pedophiles, terrorists, drug dealers, and organized criminals are using it.
Scary thought. I would not be particularly happy if that ended up being the case. But I do strongly feel that, especially because email invokes the idea of a letter. And for a while there, we did have the expectation that if you put a letter in an envelope and you mailed it, someone intercepting that letter and steaming it open and reading it was an unusual occurrence and not
Actually, I
something
understand wiping it with alcohol is a much better method than
I'm not a pro, I guess.
It's a magician's trick.
Can I comment on that?
I believe we have a right to privacy.
I mean, last week after David Cameron came up with this insane sort of comment, who basically said, "Get rid of crypto," right? Because we need to be able to see everything. On Radio 4, on BBC Radio 4 in the morning, you had Boris Johnson, our mayor, basically, when asked the question, "Do you think people should have the right to actually have a private conversation?" And of course said, "Of course not. I've been the mayor for years. Terrible idea." And that's what you expect from Boris, right? What was scary was when we had our deputy prime minister from the Liberal Democrats asked the same question, who's anti-Snoopers Charter, asked exactly the same question, and he would refuse to say, "Yes, we have the right to have a conversation between two people in private." And if it's not for systems like this, then frankly, what kind of world are we living in where there's no longer a universe that we're allowed to have a conversation in private? That's nuts. Right? Well, I mean, it's regardless, pedophiles, terrorists, and all that sort of mumble, because a remarkably small percentage.
Well, the problem that we have with this, and this is something that techies always come back to, is the genie is out of the bottle. The math that's required for doing crypto and for exchanging messages securely is widely known. So if you take away the crypto from everyone in this room, the criminals will just compile the tools themselves and have it anyway. So we can't turn crypto off. And I do believe that if that's the case, that we can't just disable crypto and make it go away, then at least the non-criminal public should be able to use the technology that exists.
Okay. One of the reasons PGP is out there is that in 1991, the U.S. was threatening to make the use of strong cryptography illegal. And Phil Zimmerman and some friends of his posted it online basically so that the law couldn't happen. And, and which is why I guess they don't consult us anymore. John, do you want to do a 2-minute introduction?
Yeah. No slides. Have paper, though. You're going to get one of these at the end of the evening. And I'm actually going to carry on. I mean, one of the questions is one of the questions around this whole thing is actually, when it comes to the dark debate, we're talking about the dark web and Darknet in terms of the Silk Roads and all that sort of mumble. But the question, when it comes to our own personal use of the internet, what are the arguments for going dark, not going dark? And the reality is, it's incredible. Talk about grey. You talk about grey. It's incredibly grey. On one side, you've got pedophiles, markets, terrorists, all that sort of mumble. But on the S side, it's actually every time and sort of being vaguely political about it, every time a choice is removed from us in the name of somebody else, we all lose. And it's a very classic thing. And one of the things we wanted to do tonight was actually say, all right, how do you go dark? right? So, and they picked the goth, right, to say more industrial, bit of a goth, right? And when Benjamin over there is sitting, looking smug at the back, who basically said he wouldn't come up, and asked me to do this, we put together a list, which is on this sheet, which is 50 ways to go dark, 50 shades of gray. The reality is that it's because the reality is it's absolutely impossible unless you live in an island with no internet access and a lot of trees. We've got highlights like, well, simple stuff. And by the way, it goes in order from basic hygiene stuff to, like, don't use Windows.
You'd rather be owned by Apple?
Or Apple. Or Google, actually. It basically says use open source software because it's much safer. That and Stallman is a nutter, but he's not wrong. He's not wrong, but he is a nutter. We have things like if you must call somebody, use the payphone. Really, that old school thing. And one of the gags is when we talk about all of this surveillance stuff that Snowden's exposed. There's only two things that's actually happened as a result of it. Now we know about it, and now they can actually legalize it, right? Things aren't getting better; they're getting way worse, right? Because now it's above board. Actually, all they're trying to do is legitimize all of these activities that were dark and hidden before. It's like, and that comes all around this notion of the expectation of privacy. Hands up who has heard that term recently. In North America, this is the fundamental gag that all law around everything that's going on right now is whether or not you have a natural expectation of privacy. It's how they manage to collect all the metadata and legalize that without warrants. It's how Cameron, well, and GCHQ and all that law, is basically saying, well, if I'm standing up here, I've got a microphone, right? Therefore, I have no expectation of privacy, which is actually, in this instance, fair enough. But when I drive my car around, which I don't have, but if I did have a car, as soon as you're outside in North America, you basically have no expectation of privacy. It could be watched by everything. Now, the thing is, we all have to actually decide where along the line of being relatively cautious, i.e. let's not turn our random Windows machine into part of a major botnet, right, all the way through to don't look up because, up. What's up there? Anybody? And? Well, the aliens. They're looking down on us, and but yeah. I mean, if you ever saw Empire, got Enemy of the State. It was absolutely hilarious when he basically says, "Don't look up ever." Right, and the gag is in London. We're one of the most surveilled cities in the world. So actually, don't look forward. And actually, it doesn't matter because we've all got cell phones, so it doesn't really, nobody's going to say anything. But the fact is that we actually have to decide as individuals how far we want to go. I personally, massively public, most of the stuff. But there are a few things that I choose not to share with everybody. Right, and I think one of the best things that the Snowden stuff brought out was the culture jamming side of it, which is that as soon as you encrypt something, as far as the NSA is concerned, GCHQ is concerned, you are now a suspect. Everything encrypted, all encrypted traffic was kept, right, and is kept for a long period of time so that they can actually decrypt it because you must be hiding something, right? Obviously, right? The more people encrypt, the more people actually start to go even slightly dark. And that could be everything from using an ad blocker, right, to all the way through to actually using VPNs and going to islands that have no extradition orders. The more complex it is. I personally don't want to live in a world where my entire communication with all of you is driven by the fear of the illusion of safety that is driven by we're going to stop pedophiles, we're going to stop terrorists, we're going to stop drug dealers. Because frankly, Jimmy Savile did this shit for 30 years, right, before the internet. None of this stuff's ever going to go away. There are fuckwits out there. And the point about pedophiles is that 30% now are kids. That's going to go to 50%. Most of, you know, the fact is that we do all have phones, and the fact is all this stuff's going out there. So this is slightly tongue-in-cheek. It actually tries to avoid saying specifics like use this specific product. But what it does is encourages you to decide where your line is. And the third from the end, on our 50 Shades of Grey, is never use Facebook, Amazon, or Google.
Okay.
Anybody going to do that? But frankly, if you want to do it, that's where you need to go. So anyway, that was the point. So have a read.
I'm going to give Jamie a chance to say something because he wanted to say something a few minutes ago. I was just going to say that the interesting thing about the 30%, if you're interested in the 30%, The Atlantic online ran an article not long ago discussing the way sexting has become a normal part of being a teenager. And so, you know, I was really struck by that when you said it because, you know, basically it's sort of the equivalent of marijuana for my generation where, you know, everybody did it, but it was illegal and you could really have your life screwed up because if you got caught. And, you know, it seems clear that the law in that particular area is going to have to be revisited very much like statutory rape, where the difference in age between the person taking the picture and the relationship has to come into play.
Yeah, and there's been a few sort of difficult test cases on some of that. And, of course, we don't want to make an ass of the law, as Dickens wrote. But at the risk of being lynched, I do want to say something in defence of security services and the police. Their job is incredibly difficult and getting more difficult. The reason they want to collect so much data is partly driven by society's absolute obsession with perfect safety all the time. It comes to them via politicians who read the opinion polls about how we expect to be protected from every single terrorist attack, every single act of serious and organised crime, every single case of illegal pornography being shared. I don't think a lot of security service employees actually want to have to deal with a lot of this stuff. But they are under pressure ultimately from us and what we expect as a society. And even though I dare say most people in this room have a particular opinion on it, it is not one that's shared by most of the general public, who on the whole are relatively comfortable, believe it or not, with a lot of this stuff. Security services do still have a lot of support from the public about being able to access individuals' communications. Now, my problem with this is that it is a societal decision to determine the balance we strike between national security, public safety, and individual liberty and privacy. Privacy is, of course, I don't think privacy is a complete right. It's a qualified right. It's an extremely important qualified right, but it is a qualified one that can be breached under law.
As I understand it, under the law, it's actually a fundamental human right.
Unless, apart from when it touches on national security. The Article 8 exemption is about national security, which is why it needs to be, Well, no, but the point for security services and the challenge I think they face is they want to have the ability under law to be able to access communications legally. Therefore, they create infrastructure that allows them to collect everything in case they need it, which then leads to inevitable abuse. And that is the fundamental problem. I don't think they've worked out how to make a distinction between sort of possible bulk access and inevitable surveillance of that data, which is why, for me, the problem I have is that I don't think we've been able to publicly debate it properly because, A, we don't really know how serious the security risk is to us. B, we don't know, and we haven't known until Snowden and others have we been able to understand the extent of the privacy intrusion. So we're expected to make a judgment about a balance between two public goods, neither of which we fully understand. And so to me, I think this has actually been a very positive development, the whistleblowing.
Except that this...
Because it has at least allowed us to begin to understand the contours of what's going on, and hopefully then we're going to be able to make a more informed decision collectively about it.
I would love to think that that's true, but the way this government is behaving is we must pass these laws without allowing any public debate. I mean, look what happened with DRIPA in July. It was the most anti-democratic thing I've seen. And, you know,
I agree with you. I agree entirely. I agree entirely about that. And I think the way that this government has handled the communications data bill, the Intercept Modernisation Plan 5 years before that, has been awful. It's been absolutely awful. But I'm talking about a principle. And the principle is that it's the public also that gets to decide, to determine the extent to which we make a judgment about privacy and security.
Can I ask, just from a legislative point of view, have you observed any bit of legislation, either from the UK or within Europe, that's actually been of positive benefit to us? You know,
to you, maybe not. To you, maybe not. But to other people, I dare say yes, because I mean, like I said, a lot of the public actually has a very different view on this compared to what you have. And I'm just trying to put in slightly the fact that there is another side of this, and there are people, in my judgment, in the intelligence agencies and the police, who are really struggling. They're really struggling with being able to try to respond to a public demand for security and safety, and their job is getting harder to do.
Okay.
I'm not talking about whether this law or that law so far has been well, and I agree it hasn't. And every time I speak to people that work on national security, I'm actually always arguing your side of the case.
Hey, I have the balloon of power.
Yours in this room, yes.
I'm going to pop this. I have a theory, which is that we have an 80-year cycle, that 80 years is about long enough for the generation that experienced the last round of really terrible abuse to die off and forget. However, in the meantime, Rich, do you want to tell us about your game?
Sure.
Hello. Just a moment, grab some slides. Here we go, we'll throw this up there. And so my name's Rich Metzen, and down there is Pontus Schonberg, and we make up an indie developer studio called Semaiopus, and we make a game called Off Grid. So what is Off Grid? Essentially, Off Grid is a video game about data privacy, surveillance, many of the subjects that have obviously been breached here tonight, in which you play a character who his daughter is potentially a hacktivist in an Orwellian society where the internet is entirely surveilled, and one day she goes missing. So you get stumbled upon by, as a complete technophobe, a group of hackers who are retired because they've given up on the idea of a free web in this fictional world. And they realise that if they can get you involved and sufficiently motivated to find out about your daughter, maybe they can start the whole thing up again. How long have I got? Have I got time to show a quick video?
You got a couple of minutes. At least show us some images of what the game looks like. Okay,
so into Chrome. There we go. Like that? No.
You know, it looks mysteriously like a file system.
Yeah, there we go.
Hey, those were hidden files.
It's not my laptop. There's no sound. Okay, well, never mind.
We should have rehearsed this, I'm sorry.
In which case, I'll just go back to my presentation and keep chatting away.
The demo after in the alcohol feature.
Yep, if you want to see more of the game, we're demoing it around the corner, so you can come and see where we're at with it. So yeah, essentially in the game, you go building to building and you get asked to sneak into different levels, which are buildings that might contain some data or a laptop or something about where your daughter might be. So whether it's an investigative journalist's laptop at the headquarters of an investigative newspaper called The Apostle, you have to get to his laptop before the security services break in and destroy it in the basement. So you might know where that pastiche is from. In order to do so, you have to go through these levels, and you have a set of AR glasses that allow you to tap into Spectrum, which is our equivalent of the Prism network, or the Prism program, and so you can see the networks that are around. And this. Okay. And so essentially, you're moving through this world, trying to pick up on what data different characters are leaving around, and then profile them in order to manipulate their behavior so that you can sneak past without being noticed. So the game is essentially about manipulating the data of different personalities around these different levels in order to get to your goal, which is a piece of data about your daughter. And you end the mission by getting up to the rooftop and putting up a mesh network node that starts to connect this city that you live in tile by tile into a new and free and open internet. So that's essentially the basic process. Where did it start? It all started from an Eben Moglen talk at INET in 2011. I, previously to 2011, really was not too aware of most of the issues, the idea that the internet was something that was at risk. I was your general layperson in 2011. I'd been working in other areas of activism, and it was astonishing to me that people could be talking about the idea that the foundation of the internet and open communication could be something that was taken away from us and censored. And I thought, well, activism full stop would crumble overnight in its modern incarnation. And I thought that's a terrible thing. As a designer and developer, I started thinking that week about, well, maybe I should try and make a video game about this. And I was at Games for Change in New York with a friend, and so we were in a kind of game scene at that point. And so I was bouncing ideas around, and I came up with this marvelous idea of a kind of Minecraft-like game where you crafted mesh network nodes and then went around trying to distribute them across different cities. And I realized it was huge, and so I put it on the back burner and completely forgot about it for a while. Until 2013, when Pontus and I started talking about what we might like to make together. We would try and come up with something to work on together. And so that's what we did. We started talking about our shared interests in data and data privacy. And we got around to prototyping a stealth game in March 2013 where hiding your data was as important as hiding your character. And so that's kind of where we came from that. And then 2 months later, the Snowden leaks broke. And all of a sudden, everyone who'd been sort of scratching their head at us as to what are you talking about and what is this game, had a reference point. And we started to realize maybe this is something we should really try and take further. So over the last year or so, we've been trying to develop a full game out of this, and we're still in the kind of relatively early pre-alpha stage that a lot of video games sit in with two-man teams. But we're kind of further along than ever, and we're making quite interesting strides towards hopefully getting a publishing deal to put it out there on large and get a big push so that it does become something of a mainstream title. Why is that important? Well, for us, off-grid, it's kind of not geared towards you guys because you're already the choir. We wanted to make something that wasn't preaching to the converted. We wanted to make a game that kind of pinged to your everyday gamer the thought that I had back in 2011 when I knew nothing about this. Obviously, post-Snowden, it's much less likely that the average game won't have any reference to these ideas. But actually, the technology that underpins it and the sort of issues that everyone here has been talking about are in such depth that, to some degree, it's almost impossible to get a handle on it just by your everyday interactions with a tabloid headline or whatever else. So for us, making the video game, is part of making something that people can get into and explore the world of data and data privacy, and explore what it means to actually exploit the data privacy of an NPC in a game and see how you feel about it, and what ideas come to you as you expose data and manipulate the behavior of other people. So yeah, I'll show the trailer quickly now that we've got sound so that you can see a little bit of it. So yeah, or actually no, we'll show this little story snippet and then you can see bits of the game after. No, we don't have sound. No. Okay. Well, anyway, so I could do the voices, but it kind of look a bit strange. So yeah, this is Off Grid. Come and see us over there.
Okay, this is the moment for all the people who had questions and comments to make questions and comments. And I'm going to start with you because you were kind enough to blow up a balloon. Microphone.
All right. So we've been talking about hiding, protecting ourselves. But instead of protecting ourselves as much as possible, there's this thing that we call security through obscurity. And we could create obscurity that creates security by just generating lots and lots of stuff that may or may not be true. And I would like to take this further, which is, all right, so there's a bunch of bad guys out there. There's always been. It's never going to stop. And we can try to hunt them down and put them in prison, or we could try to change them. So how do we do that? So if we could combine psychology, which for some reason we do not talk about at all. We just talk about math, crypto, protecting ourselves, but there's also psychology, there's also art, there's also subliminal messages, subliminal pictures, there's cartoons, yes, computer-generated graphics and all that. So if you could use this to flood the places where the bad guys and girls meet.
And brainwash them.
Pretty much. That's it.
Did you have anybody in particular that you wanted to have respond to that?
Well, I mean, I can give a simple example. More recently, a lot of women have been flooding #ISIS with pictures of themselves.
Yes, but did you have a...
Oh, no. Anybody who is most interested in answering this question.
Actually, I think we'll take questions and comments in groups of 3 so that we can move on. Yeah, Ava.
Hi, I've got a question to Jamie, I guess. I mean, I was unlucky enough to spend the first 20 years of my life under communism. I also lived in East Germany for a year as a young girl and noticed high number of suicides happening just because it was so oppressive and people had no hope. So I take your point that we are where we are. The technology has moved to allow GCHQ to run wild and collect what they can because it's cheap and easy, so why not? But it really kills me hearing how unilateral is the understanding of what is the history. You know, we are not at year 0. I remember, okay, I'm pretty ancient, but I remember. And it's absolutely adamant that you people read some books. Because I just came back from Thailand, sunny, beautiful Thailand. On the top of the Nation, which is the horrid army junta newspaper, there's a comment, join Line. Line is the equivalent of Twitter. Join Line and report on your neighbor. Beautiful Thailand, which until last year was an amazing place. You know, the economy is crumbling, everybody is getting pissed off because everybody is spying on everybody. You know, there is a massive price to pay in democracy, but also in business, in running wild blanket surveillance. So, you know, I'm not doing these events because I like having a laugh with my crypto guys. I'm not doing that. We could be doing about better stuff. But it is fucking fundamental that we teach the kids, which is why I love Richard's work. What does it mean to live under oppression? Because when you get to that point, it will be way too late. Way too late. And we've got to stop it now, and it's not something which is a luxury, because it's not a luxury. Democracy and free will, according to Rousseau and God, are fundamentally connected. If we want to run business, innovation, behave like human beings, we can't live in oppression, because you'll be seeing suicides, you'll be seeing change of psychology, which we already been through. So how can you reply to me that we are where we are and we just have to help the surveillance people? We can't do that.
A third one on the aisle, right? Yeah, that's good.
Hi there. I was making a point. I posted a tweet just a couple of moments ago saying that we need to make it easy. We need to make it easy for the average person on the street to encrypt their communications and make them realize that we have a right to privacy, and that we need to not just say, oh, I have a right to privacy, we need to exercise it. And more importantly, we need to make it easy for people to do that. So I guess my question to the panel here is, how do we go about teaching people how to do it and making it easy for them to do it?
Well, I think Bjarni is certainly working on making tools easier. I actually had to write a manual about GNU PG a couple of years ago, and afterwards I wrote a sort of synopsis of where this stuff had gone in 20 years, the 20 years since I'd last looked at it, and concluded that if contraception worked the same way, desperate parents would be selling babies on street corners. But you've already talked quite a bit about usability. So can you make it short?
I'll make it very short, and I'll pass it on. But basically, the problem with a lot of the services out there is they come across as being incredibly sketchy, right? And for everything from a VPN to a private email service, is that you go to them and they look just dodgy as hell, right? There's no standardization. There's no understanding about what goes on. And the way I'm an amateur when it comes to this stuff. But Torrent Freak, if you ever look at blog Torrent Freak, there's a fantastic roundup of all the best VPNs, who are going to hand your data over to the government when asked, all that sort of thing. But it's not standard, right? It's incredibly difficult for the average Joe public, right, to get over the geekiness of, what do you mean I need an email service that's going to do this? Why do I need a VPN? And actually, I think it's a fundamental challenge for all the people out there to actually do it. I mean, when you got people like Kim.com doing Mega, right? Not Mega Upload, but Mega, right? And of course, do you really want to trust all your shit to Kim.com? But actually, he's doing not a bad thing.
Actually, there's one thing, which is we kind of took a wrong turn about 15 years ago, because if ISPs at that time had started giving out to their subscribers software bundles to enable them to do stuff at home, we wouldn't have the Gmail problem now. We would have people running their own servers and running, I mean, we really did, I think, take a real wrong turn there.
There's one thing that sort of an overarching thought that I have on all of this, and I think that the general public does care. People value their privacy quite highly. But I do think that we have a rather deep problem in that the tools that are available for people to protect their privacy, they're hard to use and they're inaccessible. And so if you're faced with a situation where you either drop Facebook and Google and just, become a digital recluse, or have no privacy, people are going to say, okay, I don't have a choice here. I'm going to stop worrying about it. So one of the you sort of implied through your question, I think, that the public isn't aware and doesn't care. I think that's wrong. I think that the public does very much care, but I think that they feel completely helpless and disempowered. And I think that's something that, as a community, we need to recognize and try and build tools to help, and just explain the tools that exist, but they're very confusing right now. So we have our work cut out for us.
I'll respond to Eva. With the greatest respect, Eva, you gave a really eloquent defense of privacy, and one that is so similar to what I think. All I'm saying is, firstly, a lot of the demand for surveillance comes from an unrealistic expectation of security from the public. And if we only look at the security services and the police and not at ourselves collectively, I think we're missing what fundamentally is underlying all of this. I even said in this session, I'm in favour of ending mass surveillance programmes, in favour of more powerful, targeted surveillance on a fewer number of individuals. Because I think it's always going to be important that legally constituted law enforcement agencies can access communications if they need to. It would, frankly, I would find it terrifying if there was never any way they could ever access communications of terrorists. I would find that quite terrifying. And I think as a result, they're not going to be able to in the methods that they're using, a la Snowden. So I think they're going to have to change the way they operate to make it more about targeted surveillance on individuals. And the biggest problem, and I said this too, was frankly that we just didn't know what was being done in our name. And the way the process that law has been passed on this has been appalling. And I don't think you and I disagree so greatly on that.
I think you're a wild optimist.
Like I said, that's the best case for, you know, we've got referendums going on in Scotland, we've got referendums about to happen in Europe, so why don't we do a referendum on this? Because actually what you're talking about
they don't even consult us on a law.
Well, no, but actually, if it is such a major electoral point,
Right,
that people
Nobody
believe.
can hear him. Speak.
I think if I was going to say what I'm going to say now, if you'd said this a year ago, I wouldn't believe you. I'd say it. But you know, we have the technical capability to design communication systems which can't be intercepted by anyone. The question is, do we want that? Do you want to design a system under which law enforcement can't do legitimate operations and target legitimate criminals? Yes, we don't. Well, perhaps the argument may be that we don't want the government to be able to do, you know, a dragnet surveillance where they collect all communications, and I personally fully support that. Do I want law enforcement never to be able to intercept communications with judicial oversight and all of that sort of stuff? Of course I want them to be able to intercept communications of legitimate criminals. But if we're not careful, we're going to end up designing something under which they can never do that. And the question is, do we want that? Yeah.
Speaking with my hat on as a security journalist, you cannot make a whole that only law enforcement can use. Yeah. And so the proposal to put backdoors in encryption and to make everything ultimately readable is incredibly dangerous. We have an infrastructure that is under enormous attack from all over the place, and that is just going to continue getting worse. That's what I meant by saying you're an optimist. And the enormous risk that actually Cameron is talking about, he sounds, to somebody who spends a lot of time around security people, he sounds unbelievably ignorant.
I agree.
Anyway, shall we have 3 more questions and comments? There is the microphone. There is one in the back there whose head is, oh.
Okay.
I'm sorry, he'll come back to you. He will, I promise. There was a hand right over there.
Hi. A few years ago, I wrote an article for The Observer called 10 Ways to Thwart Big Brother. And it was it dealt with a lot of these issues. There were things like, if you want to make a phone call, go to a town you've never been to before, give the money to a homeless person to buy a pay-as-you-go phone, and make sure you don't get into any CCTV cameras, and use Tor. But the other 8 ways to thwart Big Brother were mainly to do with the corporations. It was things like swap your Tesco club card with a friend or your Oyster card. And what's been overlooked so far in this debate is the other side of data privacy, which is the corporations, the retailers especially, and the way that they're, in fact, piggybacking their marketing on our data without our permission, and no doubt analyzing our emails together with Google, who probably make a fortune out of that part of the deal that we make with them each time we use our free email service. And although I completely agree with Eva about privacy from government surveillance, we do, at least in this country, have some level of democracy and the rule of law, which is some protection. Whereas at the moment, there's no protection against the corporate use of data and the corporate spying on our data. And I'd say that's more urgent, for me at least at the moment, than worrying about the government. And I've also written a book called How to Live Off Grid, so come and see me afterwards, Rick.
The one thing I'd say there is at least Google can't throw you in jail. We had the guy who's the microphone, we wrested away from him. Yes.
I want to preface this question by saying, please don't shoot the messenger. As I understand it from my sort of slightly terse conversations with GCHQ, they don't regard gathering as surveillance. Gathering is gathering. It's only surveillance when you look at it. Yeah. Now, the danger you've got, don't shoot the messenger, right? The danger you've got is, let's say in a few years' time we all use Mailpile, we use Kali Linux, and we use Tor, and so on. The danger you've got is that's going to increase the power behind that argument of, look, we've got to gather everything because now we don't know what anything is. It's all encrypted, so that we can then go on and surveil. Now, I know that there's a killer argument against that. I'm possibly just not smart enough to know what it is. So I'd like to ask the panel, what would be your killer argument that you put up against that?
I mean, it is actually true. Data is not information. We talk about big data all the time, and actually from a marketing point of view, all the way through to, data is not information, right? So them hoovering all this stuff up, the reality is, unless you happen to be under the gaze of the eye, right? But that's used as an excuse not to bother, right? Which is actually worse, right? In a way, the fact if you know that all the data is being gathered up, and you're just saying, well, I'm all right because I'm not doing anything bad, so therefore it's cool, is just the start of something. Because what if, what's the whole thing? They came for the gays and I wasn't gay, so it was all right. That whole line. And actually, GCHQ basically.
GCHQ say we all gather it, and it's only information if we look at it. You just said data is not information until you look at it. So you agree with that?
No, I do agree. I actually do agree with them. But the thing is that the difference is that over a period of time, and it's all about data retention, is that how long is it that this is kept? So are you happy with the fact that everything, when you basically, so what's your name?
My name's Nick Reynolds.
So Nick Reynolds, when I basically type into Prism or the equivalent of, looking back on what you were doing 10 years ago, because GCHQ have been looking at it, are you cool with that?
Well, that Google are doing that already.
Actually, the question with respect to encrypted data is slightly different, which is that the reason you keep encrypted data forever is eventually you hope the computers will be powerful enough that you can crack the encryption and finally read the data and find out whether it's worth anything to you.
But it's not just encrypted, it's the metadata.
Yeah, I understand. We should have a third person here somewhere.
Hi. I mean, we've been talking a lot about our privacy and how to protect the information that we give out. But what about mass accountability, the accountability of governments, being able to do the counter surveillance of, well, everybody, what governments are doing all around. I mean, we are citizens of the world. We should be able to survey them as well.
That was David Brin's argument in about 1998, I think it was, a book called The Transparent Society. He proposed that we should have, that everything should be open, but we should be able to watch them as much as they watched us. We don't seem to be building those systems.
The problem with that is that we don't all start on a level playing field. There's a huge difference in being a policeman with a camera and being a black man on the street with a camera. You don't start in the same place, and therefore all that surveillance actually does is make it worse because you're gathering even more data on the people at the bottom of the pile. And I think David's idea is very naive because it's not actually realizing that there is a hierarchy in place already. And as soon as you become more visible in an attempt to watch the watchers, that means they can watch you more. And you're not, it doesn't work.
But it comes down to, I mean...
I would say that actually people on the street with mobile phone cameras are making a difference to exposing police abuse. I would say, I do think that is making a difference.
Which is still trying to prove, in the US, they're still trying to say is basically, whilst it's totally legal in the US, depending on state, but actually, but one of the things I find interesting, and I read lots about this stuff, is in terms of the plots that are foiled are that, you know, like a couple of weeks ago, when they said, oh yeah, we managed to stop an attack on Capitol Hill, and it's the FBI basically grooming some random dude, as they do on a regular basis. The thing is, and the Charlie Hebdo guys, right, were already under surveillance, and the Boston bombers are already under surveillance, not through digital channels, because they were twats, frankly, and they were already like mad, right? They were known by the government. None of this surveillance stuff, none of this additional surveillance that then, you know, actually stopped these things from happening. Good police work did, though, and this is where I agree with you, right? Good, you know, we're not going to stop spying on folk. We're not going to go away. That's going to happen. It's whether or not we are all going to be spied on or not. And the GCHQs, the FBI's, CIA's, the DEA, all the stuff that's going on with the DEA in the US right now, absolutely mad. Turns out they've been doing the whole thing in parallel, right? Is that, well, prove that this works. Give us some really good examples of how all of this wonderful data that you've collected stops anything, because so far, since 9/11, it hasn't, right? And if anybody can stand up and give me an example.
I don't think we have the data to prove that any more than they have disclosed to us the data to prove their case. I mean,
yeah,
I don't.
The NSA do their quarterly disclosure sort of humble now in terms of.
He's got the microphone.
All right.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, no, I wasn't. I was going to admit that I'm sort of in some ways quite stuck on this question, because on the one hand, I do think it's extremely important that law enforcement can access communications lawfully, but I don't see a way of them doing it without fundamentally undermining standards of encryption, which is not a price I would consider worth paying. And that's the great difficulty, and that difficulty I think is going to continue to grow, which is why I said I think we do need a shift in focus of our intelligence agencies and our security services and our police towards more human intelligence, because I think stuff like Mailpile is going to become far more popular. And actually the trend of sort of decentralized services is just going to continue to grow, and that includes a great distrust actually towards a lot of the big companies as well collecting our data. The problem is when you then think about more intensive human intelligence work, that is potentially a greater privacy intrusion and therefore needs to be much more carefully overseen, scrutinized with higher thresholds at which it's going to be signed off or authorized. And I don't think there are many people that think our current system sufficiently offers those safeguards to us. I mean, I find it rather ludicrous, for example, that the head of the Intelligence and Security Committee is Malcolm Rifkin, who used to be Defence Secretary and Foreign Secretary. I don't think enough people would consider that he is sufficiently distant from the agencies that he is overseeing to be able to offer a sort of fair and general perspective on these questions. I would love to see citizens being involved in the oversight of intelligence agencies, because people have quite legitimate different perspectives on what would constitute a reasonable expectation of privacy, a reasonable intrusion of privacy, and those different perspectives I don't think are being given a fair hearing.
Thank you. More comments?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment, actually.
And you have the microphone.
Yeah, I'm going to abuse this fact. Now, the one thing I wanted to say was that we talked about the difference of gathering data and looking at it. While that's already quite murky, what is already happening, and what's going to happen even more as the system scales up, is that actually we're going to have algorithms look at this data and pick out markers, which will further dissolve the idea that actually gathering and looking at is something different. It's going to make that much more problematic. And I don't really see how you can make a difference between these two methodologies, especially if we're at mercy of whatever algorithm some bright, math genius is going to think up that is going to be some sign of crimes committed or crimes to be committed, as it were.
I personally don't buy the argument that it doesn't matter as long as the thing looking at it is not human, David Oman made this argument at one point that because it's automated, it's okay. And Jay Stanley at ACLU in Washington, D.C. has a really good term for what he thinks matters in these systems, which is the reverberations through your life of the decisions made based on the data. And it, as you say, will be algorithms making those decisions. Yeah.
It's McCarthy.
Two more questions. We got one. Okay, Simon, we got one here in the front.
So in the titles of the talk, which has been fascinating so far, you talk about the panopticon and this idea of, psychologically speaking, not knowing when one is being surveyed versus when one isn't. Now, what's really interesting is, which we haven't really touched on as far as I can tell, is the psychology of what happens when people feel as though they are under constant surveillance. And we talk about this in George Orwell and other, we heard about this earlier in terms of communist regimes. What are your thoughts about, from a psychological and cultural and individual perspective, a state in which we know that there are areas in which we can go, so for instance, tour the Darknet, etc., or whatever kind of technologies we're using to give ourselves anonymity. What is it about that play space or psychology of being able to be anonymous and explore ourselves in a way that is not surveyed, that is inherent to being human? How do you see that fitting into greater surveillance or... I'm kind of waffling now. I just sort of throw that out as an idea.
There's a phrase which is used all the time on the internet, in this terms, which is there's a phrase used all the time, which is the chilling effect, right? It's the chilling effect, which is actually where, by actual virtue of knowing that you're being watched, or by knowing whatever you say might have implications, that you start self-censoring, right? And that is terrifying, and I find myself doing it myself, where it's like I won't use the word pedophile anymore.
Okay.
I'd actually like to pick up on that. I experienced this in a personal way just recently. I was curious about some of this ISIS stuff, and I almost visited their websites, but I didn't click because I just felt like I was already sending too many warning signals. And I'd like to turn that around and make that a question for the audience. How many people here have not gone and done research or looked for something they were curious about because they were afraid that someone might be recording that and watching them? Thank you.
Boy, that's a lot of people. Simon, pick one of the people over there.
Thanks. Sorry to the person who didn't get selected. I wanted to say that it was great that there was like the diversity in debate, and I really respect Gareth's work. I wonder what does the panel think about researchers who do like de-anonymizing attacks on Tor networks, on like finding holes, sniffing packets, and effectively. But being there before Big Brother even gets there, and how do we choose who gets to do that on these networks to push this stuff forward?
Actually, personally, I would say that was entirely legitimate research because it has to be done. I mean, one of the reasons we trust PGP is because for 24 years, people have been banging on it looking for holes. And if you can't find holes and it works well, then you know it's... You can establish that it's secure. You cannot establish that something is secure by saying, look, I built a secure product and I can't crack it, so it must be perfect. You just can't do that. So to me, that's an absolutely legitimate field of research, and I don't think anybody here would disagree. But I did want to ask, but I did want to ask you also, so this is a great moment to hand you the microphone. What's your next, what you're going to go on to research?
Yeah, so we were, to answer your question, I think, directly, we were very mindful of the ethical issues around sort of collecting this type of stuff. All of the data we collect is anonymized, so as I say, we have no idea who is visiting the websites or anything along those lines. As for conducting de-anonymization attacks on the real... For example, yeah, so conducting live de-anonymization attacks on the real Tor network is a big no-no. It depends as to whether it's legal or not. I think it's probably legal under some circumstances for researchers to do it, and probably under other circumstances it's not. You may have heard about the researchers in the US who did the de-anonymization attacks. That almost certainly was a felony, and that's why we've not heard anything more about it, because the Tor project emailed them and said, hang on a minute, isn't what you've done a felony? And their lawyer said, don't say anything because you'll incriminate yourself. And there are ways to do these de-anonymization attacks in simulation, so you can verify how they work. So just talking about the de-anonymization attacks, put your hand up if you think Tor is secure against the NSA. Excellent. Excellent. Tor is not designed to protect you against the NSA. There are very powerful de-anonymization attacks that have been known for about 8 or 9 years that can de-anonymize people with practically zero false positives, particularly by a security agency who can watch traffic all across the internet. If you were all to visit Silk Road with a modest amount of money, I could de-anonymize 10% of you every 3 months. Right.
But how many do you think Tor is slightly more secure than, say, SSL?
Of course, you're much more anonymous. It's more difficult to de-anonymize over Tor, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, it's gradients, right?
But it's easier for me to de-anonymize you using Tor than it is for me to de-anonymize you using the web, because I'm not in a powerful network position. I'm not sat in London against the transatlantic links. So although it's more difficult, you know, for the intelligence agencies, it's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually more easier for people like me, which I'm not, so just to say so. And in terms of next research, we've got a couple of PhD students working on trying to improve and sort of verify how reliable these de-anonymization attacks are. You know, one of the interesting things from our work is, I guess, if there's a large number of people visiting child abuse sites, it's fairly trivial for law enforcement or GCHQ to de-anonymize 5–10% of the visitors, and that's going to keep them very busy for a very long time if they de-anonymize 10,000 users in a couple of weeks. So the attacks are very, very powerful and incredibly reliable.
All right, I'm going to take pity on the guy in the door there because he's
Mailpile. I'm a representative from ISIS, and I'm offering you $100 million to finish Mailpile. Will you take it?
He doesn't look that rich to me. I'm sorry.
How did you get your money? I mean, this is a question directed at me personally, and I personally will not work for just anyone. So I would say no to that money. Does that answer your question?
Can I say so? You got more questions? Can I?
Yeah, we're going to take 2 more. Right. Simon, figure out which 2 people you're going to pick.
Yeah. Oh, so I am worried about the sort of constant surveillance affecting our behaviour. The Federalist papers were written anonymously. Individuals, I think, in many cases, and especially outside of this country, do feel they're able, for individual personal and political reasons, can express themselves, of course, far better when they don't think they're being constantly monitored. The whole of my book was actually about people under the conditions of anonymity exploring different parts of their identity. And that worries me greatly as a problem. But I think what the gentleman at the back said as well, I'm more worried about the companies doing it in a sense than governments do. Well, not more, but as worried by the companies doing it as the governments. I think when you think you're being surveyed, I don't think it matters quite so much who's actually doing it. But I think in terms of how we deal with some of these problems, we've got to start thinking about other ways of solving some of these problems rather than just thinking about the government. So when it comes to, and Gareth mentioned it with these illegal pornography sites, hacker groups like Anonymous are probably as good as anyone else and as keen as anyone else to get rid of these sites off the net. Because right, well, it doesn't surprise me because they think that this is ruining the good name of Tor, which of course was built mainly for civil liberties activists. So I would love to see police and intelligence agencies working with those people. And when it comes to propaganda warfare, it's propaganda war between organisations used to be waged from on high, but now you can go onto Twitter and actually talk with an ISIS operative in Syria. It's absolutely unbelievable. And I did this one. It's a really good statistic. I've got to tell you this, and then I'm stopping. We monitored a lot of tweets under the hashtag. Do you remember there was a hashtag campaign, message from ISIS to US? I think it was last year, and a lot of ISIS operatives were using that to send gruesome images to Twitter users in the US. About 10% of those were actually from people in America that were posting Goatsy, the Goatsy link, which said from US to ISIS, to people back in, I'm not saying whether that would have been effective or not, and probably not. Don't go and look that up, Goatsy, by the way. I'm sure most of you know it. But the point is, there's a lot of people out there that are sort of engaged in this low-level sort of individual guerrilla propaganda warfare. And that's a bit like what you were saying earlier, Madam. I think that's the kind of people that we need to start bringing into some of these challenges.
So 2 more, Simon?
Yeah, hello. So when I first started working with the internet, it presented itself to me as a series of alternatives, each of which was a problem-solving tool in and of itself. The web, the communications grid, everything about it was alternatives to these kind of problems. And I kind of feel like my government here in the UK, the government in the US, the United States government, and their federal services have all been sold a really bad product for defense and security, namely data. I think it's a really awful product for making America secure or for making Europe secure. And the idea that just trawling through vast amounts of individual pieces of information and storing these and generating the issues that we have is a very poor approach to the real problems of security and issues. There is a author whose name I forget, who wrote a book called Open Source Everything. And however crazy that book gets at times, it talks about the idea that decision support, i.e. those things that our actual military systems require in order to make good decisions about defending people, are not the same as the kind of decisions that shopping cart systems and Facebook liking profile engines need in order to make sure that you have a good time online. Yeah, let's have some smart solutions in security space that are about defending people in civilization rather than data products and data software. So let me throw that up. Are there any good products for that? What would you recommend to a state security system other than data trawling?
Do we have another one?
Thanks. In response to the challenge, really, to give an example of where an attack of sorts has been stopped due to surveillance, I'll give something similar, which is where quite recently where an attack wasn't stopped due to a lack of surveillance capability, which was the death of Lee Rigby. So that was the Intelligence Security Committee report, which came out quite recently, highlighted that a communication sent by him on Facebook to a contact in Yemen talked about the desire and, in fact, the intent to imminently kill a British soldier on the streets. Now, Lee Rigby had Adebowale, who was the suspect, who's now, he committed the attack. He was under surveillance by, as Jamie was talking about, as human agencies, by security services. They dropped that because there was no evidence of his. They said that he was low priority. There was no evidence he was keeping up with his extremism. However, there was this communication on Facebook saying that he was going to conduct an attack imminently. That wasn't that. The UK government say that GCHQ couldn't intercept due to the encryption. So that is an example of a case where surveillance could have stopped an attack and didn't because of the lack of capability. So I'd appreciate your views on that.
My question would be, how often was that a false positive, you know?
Well, the guy was already under investigation, and so he was at a level where they would like to intercept his communications because he was a suspect, but they weren't able to. So it was it would have been a targeted surveillance.
Ultimately, we are in this world where we actually want minority report. We want minority report. We want pre-crime, right? That's what this is all about. That's why they hoover all the data up. Right, so the notion is that you'll be able to stop something before it actually happens, right? And there's absolutely no way that that's ever happened. So what they end up doing is using data to actually say, well, by the way, shit, we should have caught that one, but there we go. At least we caught them after the fact. And it's this notion that we can, through data, and all the data in the world, the exabytes, sorry, zettabytes now of data, be able to stop everything bad from happening, and it's nuts. And that case, he was under surveillance, right? But in the same way that loads of other guys were under surveillance, and if he decided to do it on a Tuesday, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Right? It's so random. How are you going to stop this stuff? Do we want pre-crime? Is that hands up? Question. Do we think that data will solve all life, stop all murders, stop all rape, stop all child abuse?
All right. So there are people. There's a whole bunch. Have you ever seen? I think the argument was with the Lee Rigby case that had Facebook passed that piece of information on to the intelligence agencies, he would have increased. He would have become an increased priority target, which may have led to them not dropping the surveillance on him. My personal view, even though I am, well, you know my position already, is that that's pretty unreasonable from the Intelligence and Security Committee. There are 13.5 billion direct messages on Facebook sent every single day. There would have been so many false positives of people using, and I've seen it thousands upon thousands of instances of people saying, I'm going to murder this, I'm going to kill that. I think if Facebook sent all of those pieces of information to GCHQ, they'd say, oh my God, can you leave us alone? We don't want all of this stuff. We can't work, and we'll be held responsible if we don't investigate it. So that's, I think, one of the big problems.
That's basically what I was going to say. If they had done this, then that would have been a deluge of data. And the hindsight is 20/20. We can put the dots together after the fact, but while things are in progress and events are unfolding, there is such an avalanche of false positives that these systems probably don't work. Maybe they can build them, but I, as a techie, do not believe that we can build a system that does what you've asked for.
No, that's not the point. That's not the point. But do you understand what he means by false positives? You are not going to live in a perfect world. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry? What is the next event? We are actually going to wrap it up here. I'm sorry. But I believe the conversation will continue. And Eva wants to announce the next Cybersalon.
Hi, the conversation will very much continue because we're entering the next phase of Internet of Things, which will do significantly more observation and monitoring that we can possibly imagine. So we would like to preempt that and get some people who actually understand it to talk a little bit what's coming and what we can develop as a consensus of what we're prepared to accept and work out with what Jamie is suggesting. So work with the government a bit ahead of the game as opposed to after it happened. So next month, 26th of February, hyperhabitats, Internet of Things, and smart cities. Hope to see you there. Thank you very much for tonight. Thank you for the fantastic panel. And see you in the bar. Thank you.